Why is now the best time to get into Warhammer the Old World? Well, simply put, there's never been more excitement around this game. And if you've been on the fence about giving it a shot, I'm here with 5 reasons on why it's become my personal favorite of the Warhammer games. And I'm going to give you an intro list for each of the core armies in the game. And I'm going to take an educated guess at what you should go for if you want to start a Cathay force. Not only have all the core factions returned to the lineup now, but the announcement of Cathay signals a renewed commitment to rank and flank Warhammer, as it's the first brand new fantasy army in over 21 years. Alongside that, rumours abound about the possible return of some of the current legacy factions, and I suspect we won't be waiting long for new Kislev plastic kits either. So hopefully this video gives you that little push you need to jump into my preferred Warhammer system. And yes, I realise I might have said that Titanicus is the best game currently out there, but it is Old World that has stolen my heart. In fact, I may have spent an entire dinner after filming that Titanicus tournament trying to convert those very players to come and play Old World. So what is it that makes it my favourite game? Well, here are 5 things that make it great. So number 1, it's much more customizable than most of the other big games. Now, in an effort to make the game simpler for new players, a lot of customization has been removed from list building and character creation in games like Warhammer 40,000 and Age of Sigmar. Whilst this is obviously great for people learning the main concepts of Warhammer games, when you want to add a bit of extra character, that's now missing, and all of this stuff is center stage in Warhammer the Old World. Now, if I want my leader riding a customized dragon with a unique magic spear, a unique magic shield, and a bunch of other buffs to make them just an incredible fighting machine, I can do that in Old World, and I just can't in a lot of the other game systems at the moment. Number 2, the game plays actually really fast. You might think I'm lying to you after playing your first few games, but once you've got the main system down, you'll have a moment where you've gotten through a 2,000 point game in a bit over 2 hours and think, what the hell? This will normally take me an entire afternoon. What the hell's happening? Well, instead of moving maybe 50 models around on board, you actually only need to move maybe 10. Now you're going to say to me, but I've got more than 100 models on the table. What are you talking about? I think it's because of the beauty of movement trays. They act more like a single collective model, and the actual models become wound counters. And you're just removing those wound counters as the collective unit takes hit, so you're not spending loads of time moving individual models about. Number 3, I think it's cheap for a Games Workshop game system, making this incredibly good value for money to get to the table. At the moment, with a few exceptions, most of the armies want to be running lots of cavalry, as the game's developers, smartly I think, made cavalry more powerful than infantry, meaning you don't need to build and paint hundreds of models to get an army to the table. Number 4, you don't need to worry about terrain as much. Now, with Old World, unless you're playing Wood Elves, you don't really need terrain on the board to get a game set up and going. It's the sort of game where you can literally throw some books under a tablecloth to act as hills. As there isn't as much shooting as there is in the sci-fi settings, line of sight just isn't as big of a deal. Number 5, units tend to survive more than one round. So often those models that you've spent hours and hours on don't suffer from new model syndrome. Old World is often not a game about wiping models out, as it is about breaking your opponent's resolve and trying to get those units to flee. Typically, only the front ranks of a unit can fight, and most models will only have 1 attack each, meaning that you don't tend to have units being wiped out from combat alone. You need to make sure that your units are carrying banners, have heroes and lords nearby to make sure that your units don't break and can pass leadership tests. Now, obviously, all of these points are my opinion and are totally subjective. Okay, so if you were thinking about getting into Old World, how would you do it? What things should you start looking at getting? Well, I would start by building an 800-point force and get some games in of around that size with a friend just to get a gist of the rules. I'll show you here some basic lists, as well as the boxes you'll need to get going, which should give you a good feel for how each faction plays. 800-point games give you access to play around with some of the rare units that you might want to put into your list too, as it's not possible really to kind of do that for most armies at a 500-point level. Again, this is subjective, and there are rules for 500-point games if you want to start that small. You can then expand on these lists up to 2,000 points, maybe doing it in increments so you get a feel for each new unit. You'll also need to grab a copy of the rulebook and either the Forces of Fantasy or Ravening Horde books. Each faction also has an Arcane Journal book as well. These contain special characters and special formations that you can use to build your army with.
You can also look everything up on Old World Builder, but don't tell anyone I told you.
I'm not covering the legacy factions here, not because I don't think they should be used, they absolutely should be, but because it's not as simple to start with them, and I ideally want to keep this video as brief as possible. Let me know if you'd like a guide on getting started with the legacy factions. I can always film another video. I'm doing these lists based on value for money, alongside getting the flavor of each of the armies. These aren't meant to be super competitive lists, and I'm sure some of the more competitive players will give suggestions in the comments if you do want to go in that direction. I personally prefer more narrative and fun games myself. With that, here we go. Bretonnia have probably got the best of the core box options available. So you want to build out 2 units of the Mounted Knights of the Realm, 20 Peasant Bowmen, the leader on Royal Pegasus, and the unit of Pegasus Knights. That'll give you about 80 points spare, with which you can spend that on upgrades or look to get a damsel to be your wizard. For the dwarves, I would get the Dwarf Battalion. It's a really good value for money, and build out 20 warriors, and then the rangers, and then a gyro bomber and a gyrocopter. Then with some spare bits and a bit of determination, you could kit bash a Thane and a Runesmith, or if you want to pick up the individual models, there's a huge range available across not only the dwarf section in the Old World, but the Age of Sigmar range as well. For the Empire, I don't actually think that the battalion is great for beginners. I would actually go and get a box of Empire Knights, build 2 units of 6 Knights with command, then some Demigryph Knights, some State Missile troops, and then a wizard and the commanders of the Empire to build out the list. It'll give you room to play around with the heavy cavalry, it gives you some access to some ranged attacks alongside a mounted leader to lead one of the groups of knights. The mix of cavalry and ranged muskets give it a classic Renaissance vibe, with the fantasy in the form of the wizards and the demigryphs. The High Elves is another smash hit battalion box. For this, build 2 blocks of archers, half of the spearmen, both of the chariots, and you'll need to get yourself a mage and a noble to lead the force. Currently, they don't have actual miniatures by themselves, they're all mounted, so you might need to do a bit of kit bashing there as well. For the last of the Forces of Fantasy and my actual faction, get the Wood Elves Battalion box. This thing is insane value for money. You'll want to build 20 Glade Guard and 12 Deepwood Scouts, although they're kind of indistinguishable, so you could just build them all as Deepwood Scouts, as they are generally better units, but you do need to have Glade Guard in your list. They are mandatory at the moment for the current Grand Army of the Wood Elves. If you want to build some unique looking Glade Guard, I've done a little 2-minute kit bash video that you can take a look at too. Then you'll want to build out either the Wild Riders or the Sisters of the Thorn as a special choice, and round out your list with a wizard and a glade captain. There currently aren't any plastic versions of these if you want to stay on the plastic route, so if you want an archer captain, you can try and get yourself a copy of the Cursed City Wood Elf, which is a common choice. Then begin playing around with the different arrow options and magic rules that you'll have access to. Okay, for the Ravening Hordes, the Tomb Kings is another excellent starter box as you get the rulebook as well. So for 800 points, you'll probably just want to build out everything except the Necrolith Bone Dragon. That's a huge cost point there. You'll then want to decide on who you want riding the Bone Dragon. I think you probably want to keep this as a beat stick, so put the Mortuary Priest on foot and have the Tomb King riding the dragon that you can build out for when you're scaling up your army. To gain access to a plastic Tomb King, you'll probably want to get a Kemrian War Sphinx at some point, which does come with an additional Tomb King Noble in plastic form on foot. To round out the list, you can add a bunch of magic artifacts and you'll be good. With the Orcs being a horde, that means you'll need to get a lot of different models, and unfortunately the battalion box only gets you to around 550 points, and that's if you want to just go with a classic Orc mob. The Orc and Goblins list allows you to go full Goblins or even full Trolls, but to keep things simple, I'll assume you want to stick with the Orcs and maximize your dollar value. So you can grab some cavalry in the form of Boar Boys, and then add in a Shaman and a Boss. You could alternatively go down the Black Orc route and get Black Orcs and a Black Orc War Boss. For the Warriors of Chaos, many a video has already been made on how much value for money this box has, and how you can use 2 battalion boxes to make a full 2,000 point force. But for this, we only need 1 battalion, and just to use half of the battalion to make 10 Chaos Warriors, 10 Chaos Knights, and then use the 2 chariots, one as a regular chariot, and the other with a bit of kit bashing as a Chaos Aspiring Champion on chariots. Now, of course, if you don't want chariot, you can of course pick from a number of ridden and foot-based lords or demon princes, but this just keeps everything in one box. For the Beastmen Brayherds, you can go full Big Gribbly as an army with these guys. But assuming you want to stick to a regular looking force to get started with, the new battalion plus a Bray Shaman and Gorbel should get you most of the way there. If you don't want to go down that route and want to go Big Gribblies, I'd look at getting Minotaurs as your base infantry and building out from there. Now, as a bonus, I think if you're planning to get into the game when Cathay launches, and you just want to plan to get the bare essentials, I'm going to take a really educated guess on this list for you. I'll leave a comment when we know more, but I imagine the battalion box will get you around about 1,000 points by itself alone. You'll need a leader, and I bet most of you will want the Shugengan Lord on Great Spirit Longma, although I imagine the Gate Masters will act as a cheaper Lord unit. This is one where I would definitely recommend grabbing the Arcane Journal too. I think this will end up being a bit of a collector's item, as it's the first time Cathay will have received their own book. Now, what are the downsides of Old World? Well, from most people I talk to, it tends to be mostly about the quality of the models, particularly the resin and metal miniatures. Now, they can be a pain to work with, sure, but I think the new Forge World resin stuff is absolutely fantastic and quite easy to work with. Now, as for the more dated models, I kind of thought the same when I started seeing them, but with a lot of modern painting techniques, you can hardly tell them apart. And as for people complaining about the models not having enough detail, aren't these the same people that complain about there being too much detail on modern minis? Thank you very much for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like, and please consider subscribing to the channel.
A massive thanks to the Tabletop Parlor members for supporting this video, and a special shout out to the first members of the Credits Collective, Jesse Torres and Cameron M. You can get your name in the credits from just £3 a month over on my Patreon, where you'll also get early access to videos, full interviews, competitions, and more. I've got a Blue Sky account too. I've got a Blue Sky account as well, if you'd like to follow me on there for more. And if you want to keep watching, something should be popping up on screen now.